I'd like to begin with a greeting of peace, Om Shanti, to all my sisters and brothers gathered here. And I want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be with all of you. And I'm sure it's going to be a day filled with great richness and practicality also, things that you can use and apply in your own life. And firstly, I don't think anybody would argue that it's a chaotic world, right? Constant crisis. In fact, a word that's being used nowadays is the world is going through perma-crisis. It's a permanent state of crisis. One thing finishes, or maybe hasn't even finished, and another thing comes up. And so this just is a constant torrent of situations that come at us from so many different directions. Connectedness, well, we are connected. We can't take birth without connection. We can't grow up without connection. And our connections are not just with human beings. Our connections are actually much deeper. They're with every single living creature on this planet, but also with nature itself. In fact, the closest thing to me, and when I say me, I don't just mean this physical body, but I mean the inner being, the spirit, the light that shines in here. So from the moment I entered this little fetus in a mother's womb, I've been connected with matter, with nature, with earth. But somehow we've forgotten our connectedness. And so today is a lovely reminder that connectedness is natural and eternal. It always has been and always will be. And then this word compassion. I'd like to choose one particular sentence that maybe you're all familiar with. Daya dharam ka mool, paap karam abhiman. So when there's compassion, that is actually the foundation of a life of righteousness. It is the root of righteousness, but also the opposite. When there's arrogance, when there's ego, then this is the cause of all evil, all sin that we see happening in the world today. And so 3 very important words. And how do you deal with all the chaos that's happening? It is when we remember the compassion and the connectedness. And so just this reminder that in our original state as human beings, you'll see a little child also reach out to another, and they'll want to touch them, they'll want to connect with them. And if they see that another one has something missing, they'll offer it to them and they'll share it with them. And so compassion is not something to learn, it's actually there within us, but we've forgotten. And that's because we've forgotten our own inner identity. We focus so much on the external that the inner being gets left behind. And like my brother said at the start, we think that maybe when I'm 60 years old, 70 years old, then I can begin my journey of spirituality. Will I get there? Maybe I will, maybe I won't, who knows. But certainly I've forgotten that I am a spiritual being, and if I remember that I'm a spiritual being, my life today is filled with a greater richness, is filled with greater joy, and every aspect of my life is enhanced with spirituality. I speak from experience because when I was very young, born in India, and then moving abroad with my family, my parents and brother, India was a spiritual place. I remember having very deep spiritual experiences even as a child, moving abroad. And then at that point, I lost touch with spirituality because the external world was so attractive. I got engaged with that. Even science was very attractive because it answered questions. Religion wasn't answering my questions. And so as a result of all of that, I thought, well, I don't need spirituality. I think I'll wait till I'm 60 years old. I was very, very fortunate. that there came a moment very early on when I was 18 when I had an Namaste, welcome. When I had an out-of-body experience, and this is while sitting in a university theatre, looking at formulae that were being written on the whiteboard and thinking, why am I doing this? What is all this about? That out-of-body experience was a trigger to bring me back to India and start me on my journey. And I've been on the journey ever since I was 19, and it continues. And what has happened since then, of course, is that I've understood so many different aspects. But one of the things that tells me that we need something more than we have already, generally mainstream, is that spirituality actually reminds us of compassion and connectedness and helps us deal with all the current problems that we're facing currently. A couple of days ago, I was with Peter Senge on Zoom. We were on a panel that was looking at the subject of compassion in terms of the environment and climate change. As you know, in a few days, there's going to be the 28th Climate Change Conference happening in Dubai. And I've been attending these conferences every year since 2009. But this is the first time that there's been a subject of compassion taken up in preparation for this event. And he said something that actually is at the heart of everything. He said that at the root of all the problems, all the crises of the world, is the fact that we are disconnected. We're disconnected with ourselves, disconnected with each other, even our closest, nearest and dearest ones, our family. We feel disconnected with them, and definitely we're disconnected with nature and other creatures of the earth. And this is the cause of not just the one crisis of climate change, but in fact all the crises that we see. And so he summed it up in just one sentence. If I think about the economic breakdown, India seems to be booming, but London, where I live, we have food banks for people who used to be middle-class citizens. You wouldn't expect them to be in a food bank. We have beggars on the street, which I never saw until the last 5 or 7 years or so. And so if that's a state of one of the countries that people have a very deep connection with, especially from India, and now we see India moving ahead of the UK in terms of economic prosperity and GDP, well, that's brilliant. But I think it's because India still has the roots of spirituality. And in Britain, they're struggling, they're trying, and it's wonderful that we have a Prime Minister who's deeply connected with India, but yet the country itself is going through a very hard time. And I mention one country, but I look around Europe and I travel across Europe continually, and I look at the US and Australia, all these countries that we would have said were first world countries, and everywhere we see the volatile markets, the difficulties of dealing with diversity. We love the word diversity, but when it actually comes to working in a team with people from diverse colors, races, backgrounds, we find it not so easy. It's quite a challenge. And to manage a company that has diverse teams, now that is a challenge in itself. And so we're also dealing with a very, very volatile political situation. Uncertainty is a key word for most people. There was a time when people used to make 5-year plans. Does anyone make a 5-year plan anymore? Most people are thinking about the next 6 months. And even within that, there's always a big query and a question mark. How are things going to develop? How are things evolving? In climate change conferences, we've used something that's called the Talanoa Dialogue. And it started in Fiji. And so climate change conferences have used it since 2017, when Fiji and Germany hosted the conference together. But it took place in Bonn. Fiji couldn't afford to have it, but Bond stepped in. And within that, they have 3 different things that they look at. Where are we now today? What is our vision for the future? And how are we going to get there? Just 3 simple statements. And the dialogue is based around that. So the current situation, well, I've described it very briefly, but you know more about it than I do probably. You know all the detail about that. I won't go more into the challenges that we're all facing. I've mentioned a few of them. But what is the vision? We asked people in 129 countries at the start of the 90s, what is your vision of a better world? And I think if we were to repeat that same exercise today, that was probably the largest survey done by an NGO across the world. And so we had every country with a population of over 1 million participating in that. And they were looking at this question, how do you see your better world? How do you see relationships in your better world? How do you see yourself in that better world? And I can tell you the summary of that question. And the project went on for 3 years, and it took us 6 months to compile the results. And they were then published in a book, which is available, Visions for a Better World. And I can summarize it in 5 words. The vision of a better world was a world of peace, a world of love, a world of truth, a world of joy, and a world of purity. Purity in the sense of cleanliness of heart, cleanliness of spirit, cleanliness of environment. And so purity, not just pure water and pure food, but inside and outside. And so that is the vision. And I'd like to share a very simple image that tells us how all of these things can come about. If you think about a boat on dry land isn't fulfilling its purpose. But when the boat is in the water and is moving in a specific direction of choice, then yes, it is. But what happens when the water starts coming into the boat? Bad news. It's not going to get to its destination. And another aspect of this, when the water starts leaking in, it starts at one end of the boat. Is it going to stay there forever? Unlikely. It's going to move across, and within a very short space of time, the whole boat is going to be filled with that water and will sink. So this one image actually comprises of a few lessons for all of us. The first lesson is of spirituality, inside, out. Whatever is within me, I have to be able to access that and share it with the world outside. But if I let the world outside enter inside, I have a problem. And what is inside, we're not in touch with. And we're constantly absorbing the things that are outside, and they're coming in. And so what is inside are these 5 qualities that I mentioned. They are the essence of the spirit, the human soul. The 5 qualities that I listed earlier, these are at the heart of every human being, every spirit. But why is it that we're trying to buy love? Why is it that we're looking for peace and thinking that having a treaty is going to make a difference? Why is it that we think it's going to be spending a huge amount that's going to buy me happiness? And then we discover that none of these things happen. I don't find the love I want. I don't find the peace that I want. I don't have the happiness that I would like to have. And that's because we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking outside. But they are actually the qualities of the inner being. But I don't make time to be able to connect with myself and go inside and feel these. And so it's beautiful that we were talking about meditation, silence at the start, and how to be able to access the treasures that I carry within. Those treasures are within every human being, but we've forgotten how to connect with those and to be able to express them. So what's inside going out is perfect. For what's outside, at the current time, we would use the word Kali Yuga, the Iron Age. And I think everyone here is very familiar with that term. In Kali Yuga, it's characterized by the negativity, the negative forces at work. And negative forces are heavy. And when something is heavy, it pulls you down. But what's been happening is that we've allowed the things of Kali Yuga to enter us. Rather than I, the inner being the master of the self and sharing these outside, I'm allowing the negativity and the pressure of the world to go inside of me. And then, once it's in one part of the boat, it's going to impact the whole boat. We've forgotten that nothing in the world is isolated. It cannot be. You know, many years ago, I was at a conference at the European Parliament, and within that, they were talking about what is the chemical impact of pollutants within water, atmosphere, etc. The World Wildlife Fund people shared a very interesting statement. They said that the pollutants are not just in one place, but they've reached the birds, the fishes across the world. So you find the fishes in the polar areas, and they carry the same 400 plus extra chemicals. The birds that fly above the ground, they carry the same number of unwanted chemicals. Now just imagine what's happening to the physical body. I don't need to spell it out any further. So there are no boundaries except what human beings have created out of selfishness. That's it. There are no other boundaries. And so we are connected absolutely one to another, and with the earth, with the air, with the water, with all the elements of nature. And so how can we make that vision of a world of peace and love and truth become a reality? Can it be a reality? It's even a question that I have. Well, I think that we are all here because we share a vision that there can be a better world, and that business has a huge contribution to make to creating a better world and making it possible. Because when you use your resources in the right way, then those resources help not just the individual, but they also help the community, they help the nation, but they can also help the world also, because of the state of interconnectedness. When I think about compassion, then maybe some people think that, well, compassion and kindness are not part of life today because everybody's focused on the material aspects of life. But there's one particular thing that's happened in India, but also across the world, and that is the whole subject of CSR. And corporations have understood that there's not just the concern for the bottom line, the pound, the rupee, the dollar, but also for community, for social development. But also, business has a huge responsibility for what's happening within the environment. And I don't know if there's anyone here from the oil and fuel industry, probably not. But you know, they were the largest number of people, 500 plus in Glasgow at the COP 2 years ago. And again, it was the largest delegation in terms of Egypt last year. And this year in Dubai, I'm sure it's going to be represented very well. But in fact, we have other factors that we can use for energies. And Brahma Kumaris have been very involved in that concern. Solar energy, for instance. India has abundant sunshine. And in fact, compassion is like the sun. The sun can radiate its light everywhere from one location. In the same way, every human soul has within itself compassion, and that compassion can radiate out everywhere. But what's happened is that like the sun sometimes gets hidden away behind the clouds, the negativity and the selfishness and ego of Kali Yuga have very often hidden away the compassion. And so all we need to do is to make sure that we make the time for ourselves to connect with the compassion that lies within. Another thing that happened through COVID times, we saw two things. We saw a huge amount of wellspring of compassion coming up, to the point where, in fact, I'll just mention India, but it was a worldwide phenomenon. In India, you had people like Tata Sons, Reliance and Infosys, companies like this, who contributed greatly to the well-being not just of their employees, but their community, but also to the medical infrastructure here in India. And that went a long way. And so when something removes that cloud for even a short space of time, and COVID removed that cloud of negativity for a little while, and of course now we've come back to the usual story and business carries on as usual, but we saw how business actually was concerned with doing something that was good for all. Think about Jamshedji Tata and the founder of the Tata Group, and his founding principle in terms of his work was that there should be care for the well-being of not just the employees, but their families, the community, and society at large. And so to that end, there was investment in healthcare facilities, but also social development facilities such as education and so on, and that legacy continues. I mentioned one, but in fact there's many, many others currently who are engaged in several practices that work in the same way. We talk about the principles. One of the things that people talk about a lot are the masculine principles and the feminine principles. And I think there's now an overwhelming majority that recognizes that the feminine principles of things like peace and love and justice, these are so important, but they've gone missing in a world in which there's only been a patriarchal system. And within the last 20 years, but in the Brahma Kumaris for the last 80 plus years, in which the founder decided that if you wanted to have a society in which there was justice, then the biggest injustice of all, and that was the question of the role of women, had to be looked at and it had to be sorted out. And so in 1937, he handed over all the administration of the organization, at that time just a little group in Karachi in Sindh, now today in Pakistan. But at that time, just imagine, in the 30s, he handed over all his wealth, all his assets to a group of young women, knowing that they would be the leaders of the future. And today the organization is a worldwide one in 120 countries, but still that principle, the guiding principle of having women as leaders continues. It can be called affirmative action, so that that side which hasn't had an opportunity is given the opportunity to create balance. And so one of the feminine principles is actually that of compassion. Why? Because with compassion, we're able to see the whole. Compassion gives us the power to go deep inside ourselves and connect with the inner wisdom and the deeper truth, in which we are not just seeing parts, but we're seeing the whole. You can see how in medicine we thought that it was very important to look at specialization, and I agree it's absolutely correct. But it's only when a team of specialists come together that they're actually able to give us the proper diagnosis. Mr. Patra was very focused on talking about diagnosis. And I think that the feminine principle of looking at the whole rather than looking at parts is very much part of the same in terms of society. And when, on a personal level, I go deeper and deeper within myself. It's only through that consciousness and awareness that I'm actually going to be able to see what it is that I need to do in terms of bringing together and connecting with others. I spoke about one of the challenges of diversity and team building. How do you do that? How do you create respect in which you give dignity to each and every individual? It's only by going on an inner spiritual journey personally. It doesn't happen otherwise. You can have lots of laws against discrimination, and that's happened in many countries, certainly in the UK, the USA, and in India. But discrimination isn't dissolved by laws. Discrimination is dissolved and dignity, respect restored only through an inner spiritual journey. And in that spiritual journey, you connect with those original 5 qualities that I mentioned. Then I can have respect for myself, I can recognize my own value, and I can also begin to love myself. And they say that, well, one of the commandments is that you should love your neighbor as you would love yourself. And basically in India we talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. How do I see everyone as part of my family? It's the same concept. In Africa they would say Ubuntu. I am here only because of you, and we are here together. And so the idea of the one family within our Indian philosophy, again, very much that same idea. And so when I learn to value myself as the inner being, nothing to do with my bank account, nothing to do with my property or the position that I hold, all these things can disappear very quickly. We heard this from the story. But my value lies within the qualities that I have within myself. And through my own spiritual journey, connecting with those qualities, I value myself, love myself, but then it extends out so that I'm able to love each one, I'm able to value each one, and have respect for each one. Working in 120 countries, you can imagine, it could have been challenging. Cultural, religious, color, all of these factors could have created huge divisions. But together, we know that it is one family and we'll move forward together. Part of the vision that came to us when we were doing the global visioning exercise was a vision that came in from Africa, and I've never forgotten it. And I'd like to share this now in terms of connection and compassion. When I look at someone's skin, it can be darker or fairer than others. It can be white, brown, yellow, whatever. But when I go beyond the skin, deeper inside, then the color of our sweat, our blood, our tears is identical. There is no difference in any of these. We are one family, one species. And so definitely the feminine principle in every soul carries masculine and feminine principles. But through that inner journey, we're awakening the highest within the self so that then we can actually practice these in our life. What I'd like to do now for the next few minutes, and I know that we're short of time, but I want us to have this experiment. You've all been sitting here for a while, very patiently. Just sit comfortably, both feet on the ground so that the body is balanced. I'll share a few thoughts and invite you to follow these ideas. Going within, I allow the body to just relax. My shoulders, my face, and I focus on the center of the forehead, the location of the inner being, the soul. In this awareness, my thoughts slow down, and as I watch my thoughts, I can now manage to change their direction. They no longer come to me from outside, but I create them according to my choice. I create the thought of peace. And in this awareness of peace, a door opens and I tap into the love, the truth, the joy, and the purity that lies within. In this awareness, I can connect with the divine, the source of light, of love, peace. And from the source flows the energy of compassion. I allow myself to receive this. And this energy flows out into the world. And the power of compassion creates a new culture. An exchange of peace and love. And together we create a better world for all. Connecting with the self, I draw on not just my own inequalities, but I connect with the source. And so there's an infinite flow of energy. And so there can never be compassion deficit. After COVID, many people complained about compassion deficit. We don't ever have to go through that state of burnout. But when I'm using my energy, it's restricted and limited. When I connect, then it's an infinite flow. And so if I wish to enhance compassion in my life, let me make time for myself, have compassion for myself, and then I can have compassion for all others. So I would recommend that the most is to make time for silence, meditation, prayer, reflection, call it what you will, but also time for spiritual study. So I'm feeding my mind good food, just as we're concerned about good food for the body, but now good food for the mind, nourishing ideas of spirituality and truth that can give me the strength to go beyond the challenges and actually come to a state of awareness, of togetherness, connectedness, and compassion. Thank you for making time in your schedule for spirituality. Om Shanti.